Today, it's you and me for the workshop in the Thinker Growth community. Naomi is out. She's got some things she's taking care of, and it is you, me on the call.
Just a couple of guys bantering about who knows what.
Who knows what? We'll never know. So, what are your thoughts? What's on your mind today?
I had something. It was something along the lines of an item we were discussing yesterday, but I should have written it down. I thought that would make a good subject for discussion, and now I realize I didn't write it down. And
what was the context?
Well, let's see. We talked about setting out a vision for a project we were working on, or maybe working on, and we talked about what else did we come across? We had that fantastic podcast interview yesterday afternoon with oh boy, I really am getting old. Steve Woodruff, about the point, as in get to the point. And I'm trying to remember what else we went over. We got a new author, and we talked about trying to here's what it was. Yeah. Okay. I knew if I fumbled along long enough, I might find it. So, it actually provoked an interesting conversation going for the afternoon walk with my bride yesterday about our newest author's first book that they're going to publish with us. And you were asking, and you were not quite sure yet at the time, what was the benefit to the prospective reader, to the target reader. And so you have to, I've encouraged authors to do this in the past, to say to themselves, okay, I'm a traveler stopping in an airport bookstore, or I'm somebody who's interested in the topic you want to write about, and I'm at a Barnes & Noble, or I'm on a website somewhere, and I've got literally millions of titles competing for my attention, most of which have nothing to do with me. But by breaking it down into sections, I'll find something that could be remotely interesting, at least a broad topic that's remotely interesting. And so then when I get to that point, how are you, through the mere cover of a book, going to tell me that if I pick that book up and pay for it and read it, I will be the better for it? Because that's the only reason we're going to get people's attention, right? Unless you're a global celebrity brand and you publish a book and, I'm going to read this book just because I, respect this person for their success and their notoriety. But for everybody else, we've got to tell them right up front on the cover of their book, why should you read? And, so my bride and I went a little back and forth on that yesterday, but I thought maybe we should talk about that, putting your benefit foot forward when you're not a established global brand that most everybody's heard of.
Okay, well, let's take it from the established brand that everybody's heard of, because there's something fascinating that happens in that exchange when we, as normal Joe folks, see somebody else who we look up to, or we want to be like, or we respect what they're doing, or we want to know more, right? So Ryan Reynolds, let's say, well-known actor, now businessman, and he grew the businesses that he purchased, like Aviation Gin, on the back of people liking him as an individual and him as an actor. He could show up almost anywhere, and there's going to be a group of people who will arrive with him.
Yeah.
They'll want to see him, no matter what he's doing. Then there's a group of people that, if they like gin, let's say, they have a common interest, and well, if I've got a common interest already, why wouldn't I try this celebrity's gin? Because I want to be like them. I admire them in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say that's the extreme. It's the celebrity status. It has a draw to it. There's magnetism built in. And then there's this line where everybody else lives in, where now it's more transactional in nature. I'm not building relationship or desiring relationship. I'm building this transaction. So now it's, well, I'd like gin first, and now I'm going to go find the various gins, which then it's label, it's the wording on there,
Mm-hmm.
the look of the bottle. It's all marketing. Further back from that is everybody who's like you and me, just kind of sitting around, and we are aspiring, let's say, to sell our small batch gin. If we threw a post out online saying, "Hey, I've got small batch gin," not that you could do that, but if we had this small batch gin thing, we get all of our family and friends, and no one else would pay attention.
Yeah,
because we're not at the point of shopping for the people in the middle where they're trying to desire this transaction, and nobody on the celebrity end is looking for us. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
So I think what we're talking about is traveling through that path from I've got something that nobody knows about and nobody knows about me, to I've got something that I want to tell everybody about, but nobody knows about me, to everybody knows about me and I've got the thing that you want to purchase.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the continuum.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a spectrum. It's where you go from, I don't, I say a bunch of stuff, nobody cares. And, to make it even worse, I don't have anything to offer. Then you suddenly have something to offer, but people are used to not caring. So this is the spectrum where I think a lot of people coming into the world of thinker growth feel like they're maybe a little bit ahead, or maybe right on the spot, or maybe even not quite there yet, right? They've just got an idea. And so then the question becomes, okay, if you've got, maybe you have an idea, but how do you know that people are going to pay attention, even if they will stop and give you the time of day? And the only way you really know that is if you, there's the not only way, but one of the ways I can think of, since you mentioned the on social media, right? You mentioned that people are not yet at the point of purchase for that. And so just mentioning it on social media doesn't do any good, because they're much closer to the top of your funnel. And so you have to meet them where they are, which means you got to sell them a different product very often for free to get them to move them in the direction of buying the one that isn't for free. So one way around that, of course, is to go to where people actually are buying, and depending on what you're selling, that in many cases is a feasible pathway. That's why retail is still a successful business, because if it's a product or a commodity, particularly if it's one that you regularly need or want, then there's a good chance that you can get it out there pretty easily. You can offer it in places where people are known to be in buying mode, and you can probably achieve a little bit of traction and build from there. If you're in service-based stuff like we are, different ballgame. And I think it's much more along the lines of you got to start by selling selling trust for free, creating a positive association in the mind of the target consumer with you, your brand, and the offer that you put forward, which requires, as we like to say, becoming good at communicating what that value is, becoming good at getting people's attention primarily by saying to them, here is the benefit to you of giving me 10 seconds or 10 minutes or an hour out of your day to hear about it.
Yeah, the intersection that I think we're talking about is becoming known and then having something of value to sell to someone. The becoming known, that idea of freemium is to accelerate into the usage of a product or service. Typically, freemium models are with service-based businesses, software as a service stuff, where the delivery cost is pretty insignificant. If you're serving 100 consumers, you could be serving 1,000. You could be serving 10,000 with very little incremental costs. So you can pack a bunch of people in the freemium model. A certain number of people convert into a paid model where you make your money. That acceleration into usage is to educate that person on what that service does. Products, a little bit different because they're typically used, right? So you might give a little bit of a discount to get people to use that product. Like if you're making a new pizza, you have a new pizza brand. Well, pizza's been done 1,000 different ways, more than that. If you have a new pizza brand, you better be doing something to get people to change their pizza eating habits. And usually that's some sort of discount. It's somebody who's standing in the store. It's some flashy promotion, which is really just like, hey, I'm over here.
The guy out on the street flipping the sign up and down and all that.
Exactly. And it works because a certain portion of people are going to want to try something new.
Yeah.
At any given time. But back to the idea of social media, on this end of where everybody knows you, and because they keep seeing you everywhere, they believe that they know you, they have some impression about you, then they might want to try your product or service. That's the whole thing behind building a brand online. That's what people talk about. Hey, you got to build your personal brand. It's really, how are people seeing you in the marketplace? That's videos, that's photos, it's how you show up in comments, it's the posts that you're making. That's really the purpose of all that. It's to accelerate into being known or recognizable, so that when you say, hey, I've got this product or service, I'm already over that hump of you recognize me, you're comfortable with me, which means you're more likely to be comfortable with that transaction. Like the aviation gin, I'm not even certain I've ever tried it. But if I was out at a restaurant and they were like, hey, is aviation okay? I'd be like, I'm sure. Why? Because I've been exposed to it through commercials. And because I have also a positive view of Ryan Reynolds. I don't know him at all, but I have a positive view, and therefore I have a positive view of his gin. That is a subtle and oft overlooked component of building a sales strategy, particularly when we are online. Do things that make you become visible, and if you are generally likable, people will believe that they think people will have a positive impression of you, having no concept of who you are at all. But that's necessary if you want to sell them a product or service when there are alternatives. If 3 gins are lined up, I'll probably, try the aviation one.
This, I don't mean to get off on a philosophical tangent here, but
of course you do.
But I'm going to do it anyway. But it's actually a very short philosophical tangent. I remember something that the sages talked about, where they said, ours is a world of illusion. And it was a bit of a different topic, but I thought of that saying because of how exactly what you're talking about. we have no freaking clue who Ryan Reynolds really is. We only know who he appears to be on TV. And yet we like it. And so, we make that positive association. And I thought back to my days as an insurance agent, where absent a genuine celebrity brand, I cooked up a false one. And it worked in a lot of ways. People really responded positively to these. I went and did this photo session of me striding around the streets of Bellevue, which is Seattle's upscale Beverly Hills type of neighborhood, right? And they have a downtown area with these high rises that look like they're out of the Matrix movies and all that. And I walked around in a sharp coat and tie with a black top coat and sunglasses, looking like an FBI agent, looking like James Bond, and people lapped it up. And I had to tell, some people as I met them, I'm not really like that. That's not what I just thought it was cool. It's aspirational for me, but it's not really what I do. The reality is I sell insurance policies. So there's a theatricality element to that. And if, and it's true, it's what sells. What sells is quite often divergent from what actually goes on in the fulfillment sense of it. And we're obviously not encouraging people to tell out and out bald-faced lies. But there is something to be said for the fact that I carried myself on social media a certain way. And I received some very good advice at the time from a mentor of mine who said, don't talk about insurance. Don't try to explain it. Don't tell people about prices. Don't do pedagogy about what different coverages are. Nobody cares about that. But people are interested in who you are, your family, your hobbies, your activities, your sense of humor, your opinions, all that kind of stuff, right? That stuff does sell. And it did. As soon as I switched my strategy, and the only time I ever talked about insurance was to make fun of myself, right? I would post photos of, Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day and say, let's sell some insurance, or something like that. Or I'd do these theater of the mind posts where I said, let me explain the value of life insurance through interpretive dance. And people they'd lap it up. And I would get referrals out of it. And I would get people even reach out to me directly and say, I'd like to have you quote my insurance and see if, because I like you. So that absolutely does work. But until today, I hadn't really thought about what was the benefit that people were latching onto when I did that. I didn't have enough of a vocabulary at the time to really think about that. So I never perceived myself as projecting a benefit onto the videos and the various content and all that I did. I never did. I just did it and it worked, but I didn't know why. And now that we're having this conversation, right? And I think back to what my mentor at the time told me. The benefit that I was willing to put up front was to be very open and personal so that people could, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think people could get a sense of the type of person that I was and what I was interested in and what my aspirations were and how seriously I took my work. And then when it so happened that their previous agent had retired or gone out of business, or they just plain didn't like him, they had somebody that immediately came to mind as an alternative that they could talk to.
So the benefits of a positive impression, I think, is one of the critical things we're talking about. Whether that's online or in person. And there's, I think, three major things at play. One is perception. So a insurance agent who shows up in a suit is perceived to be smarter, more capable than a person who showed up in sweatpants and a t-shirt with a chocolate stain on it. And though that person may very well be the same person, at various times of their lives. A Saturday night might be around a bowl of ice cream, indulging in that, but you never go to the office. So the people do carry a positive perception towards a person who's dressed up. They present well, which is important. The person who's dressing up, the old adage of dress for success. The person who's dressing up exudes a confidence about themselves. It actually changes your processing of who you are in that moment and how you're showing up, which the third often overlooked thing is this energy exchange between people, which is mysterious.
Yeah.
And I believe it's through that perception, that positive perception and that positive self-image, call it confidence, that energy exchange changes. And now there is an energy exchange of trust and like-mindedness, which if we move to insurance is a black box for a lot of people. It's confusing. It's expensive. It seems forever. It's like one of these big monumental decisions I think people think about, like, this is insurance. And because it's so often misunderstood, I think that agents overlook the amount of trust that is involved in that transaction.
Oh, absolutely.
And as soon as they start overlooking it, so they don't show up to that transaction as, 80% of this is trust and 20% of this is, what you're buying.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what it is. Because agents who show up to that, back to the idea of perception, positive perception and confidence and the energy exchange, people who show up to that moment of perception, confidence, energy exchange will massively outsell somebody who just thinks it's the transaction and I'm just here and I need to make sure I educate you on all these things. Yeah, that's true. But at the end of the day, somebody just wants to call up somebody, the customer just wants to call up the agent and be like, hey, here's what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
Get me out of this bind. This is covered, right? That it's not about the transaction, it's about the trust, particularly in insurance. And there are probably other things like that.
So much more than I ever realized. Like with hindsight now, in ways that I had closed myself off from at that time, I couldn't perceive that. But I can perceive it now in the sense that, after I left, I immediately knew, after I got fired from my last position, I immediately knew who I was going to trust with our household policies. And, as you know, in the last 7-8 months, we've completely relocated across several states. We left Washington State and came to Arizona. I checked with my agent in Washington. I said, can you manage my policies in Arizona? He said, absolutely. And I said, well, then I'm not leaving. Why? Because I know the guy. I've known him for 10 years. He's been in the business that whole time. He shows up consistently. He has a good, wholesome character. He's a family man. He's deeply involved in his community. He's doing all the right things, all the things that I learned how to do. But he's actually does them even better than I did because, well, I won't go into that. I'll just say, and I'm sure there's plenty of fantastic insurance agents in Arizona. I just didn't even want to bother because I have such a good relationship of trust right now.
Yeah. Insurance is an interesting business. I think a lot of other businesses are like that as well, where the transaction is a little bit complicated. There's a lot of detail to it, and people don't like complication or detail. So they really just want to have a veneer of an individual who's going to tell them this is the right thing for you. And there has to be a little bit of theatrics around it as well. And here's why I say that. When I was selling, had an e-commerce company, we sold residential heating and air conditioning equipment to consumers, which was a new transaction. A lot of people didn't know what they needed. And so I built a sizing estimator probably one of the most advanced sizing estimators for heating and air conditioning equipment that you've ever seen. And it used 50 years of temperature data from your zip code. So we knew your design temperatures. We did a lot of fancy calculations about the size of the equipment and your construction of your home and that type of stuff. Now, here's why this is important. You could, in moments, click through the sizing calculator and it would, boom, match up all of these components that you needed, several thousands of dollars of heating and air conditioning equipment, the air cleaner, the air purifier, everything that matched perfectly. Now, my computer system could do it in milliseconds. So once you click through, boom, I got it matched. It's done. Now, people didn't trust that because it was too fast.
Yeah.
And so I built in a system where you click through and then you go, get my correct equipment. Boom. And it went through it deliberately just paused and went, we're thinking about the right equipment for you. Boop, 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 boop. And then it would give your good, better, best options. And I can't remember what the percentage was, but more people completed the slow path than completed the fast path, which goes back to this idea of perception and trust in that transaction. What does a person need to perceive? What theatrics do they expect to be part of the transaction? And if they aren't, you have to give an explanation for it. And if you don't give an explanation, they give their own explanation, and that's usually negative. So the cell phones, I was also part of the initial launch of cell phones at Best Buy in this new department they call Digital World. I was in our area. I was the first supervisor of Digital World. And the Motorola StarTAC, I don't know if you remember the Motorola StarTAC. It was the flip phone, right? Super, super light, like so light, almost nothing to it. The plastic body, plastic buttons, plastic insides, and a tiny little battery. During market research at Motorola, they found that nobody trusted this super light cell phone.
Yeah.
They thought it was a toy. And so Motorola added weights to the phone to make it heavy so that people would think that it was valuable. Now, that is how fickle people are. We have unspoken desires about our own perception. We want to see things a certain way. And when we don't, we get worried because it feels like that can't be the thing I'm looking for. That a phone, hundreds of dollars, fits in my pocket, talks to, people think it must be using satellites or something like that. They don't even know how the thing works, but that is too light.
Yeah,
That
if I set it down
can't
on a
be
tabletop on outdoors, the wind might blow it away.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's too light. You have no idea how the system works.
Huh.
And you're qualified to go, well, that's a toy. It's really it's interesting. The same way we might categorize an insurance agent and say, well, he doesn't have a suit on, therefore he doesn't know he doesn't have a clue about insurance. We would also look at a piece of electronics that most people know nothing about and go, that's too light. Must be, well, I'm going to get the heavy one. Okay, it has no bearing on anything. So
I don't mean to go ahead.
I think so. To end that whole section, I think the thing that a person needs to keep in mind is if it's a book, because I think we started this with books. We've talked about books. We talked about alcohol. We talked insurance. We talked electronics. So a book for a given genre, people expect a certain look. You have to stay within that look, but you have to push it enough with titling, with the color, with look feel, so that it stands out a little bit and says, like we talked about, like you talked about before, this idea of benefit. It says on there, this is going to change you. This is going to be what you need. The thing that you're looking for, this can be what you need. Right.
Yep.
And if it's gin, let's say, it doesn't hurt to be Ryan Reynolds, but if you're not, you at least have to look a bit the part, whatever that part is, for the story that you're telling, and you have to be likable, because who doesn't, nobody wants to drink with somebody they don't like. They're certainly not going to drink from, somebody's gin that they don't like, which was great to be Ryan Reynolds. Everybody likes Ryan Reynolds. If it is insurance, you look the part. Gin, you look the part. Books, you look the part. If it's electronics, you got to know what the part is that people expect as well, and that can only sometimes be found out through market research. Nobody, engineers weren't super excited about adding weights to it. They were, I'm sure, I'm a geek, so I think at that time they were probably like, wow, I can imagine the amount of power we could fit in this tiny little package, and it doesn't weigh anything. Turns out nobody wants to buy it either. So sometimes you don't know these things until you research them, but it's perception, confidence, the energy exchange. There's probably more trust involved in transactions than you think there is.
So I have another philosophical tangent to go on here, even though I said I wasn't going to do it. I'm going to do it twice. It reminds me of this. I used to, I'd hear people say perception is reality. And I'd say, no, it isn't. Right? But then the other end of that spectrum is that perception has nothing to do with reality, and that's not exactly true either. If for no other reason than exactly what you're talking about. Because a lot of times you're very correct to say if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But buried within that refrain is your perception of what a duck should look like. Your idea of, what this template, whatever it is, should look like. And if it doesn't match it, then you're dealing with a counterfeit or an amateur or, something that has a misplaced expression or representation of itself, which is totally possible. Like, I've come across it too many times for it not to be just as true. So the correct answer, I think, to the whole perception versus reality thing is it depends. Sometimes perception has nothing to do with reality. Correct. Other times it has everything to do with reality. Also correct. You just don't know which one you're dealing with from one case to the next. And I'm trying to think of an example of this. But one isn't coming to me. I also thought of the Chesterton quote. This is one of my favorite ones from G.K. Chesterton. He said, the problem with this world of ours is not that it makes no sense, because it does. It's also not that it makes complete sense, because it doesn't. The problem is it almost makes sense, but not quite. Its exactitude is obvious, while its inexactitude remains hidden. And here, what I'm using for the parallels is the fact that just because somebody says they're interested in something, and you then offer it to them, doesn't mean they're going to buy it. Because there was that whole perception in their head of what that thing actually is, and then you come along and offer it, like I have many times, and people say, I don't want it. And I'm sitting there left scratching my head. They said they wanted it. I gave it to them, but they didn't buy it. Because what they were expecting in their head was something different than what I actually presented them. I presented them reality absent of perception. And it didn't work. So we have to take into account the perception that much larger, much more expansive, much more subject to interpretation and imagination and preconceived notions, dimension of what the market is bringing. And whether you're talking again about books, what's the value of reading this book? Well, my life will become better. Okay. My cynical response to what's the value of alcohol? Well, I'll have to go to the bathroom more often. But people perceive there's value in drinking alcohol, right? If you don't tap into that dimension of it, if you can't be bothered to explore it, then you're probably going to end up with a lot of disappointment. Not complete. You will get people who just want the bones without the meat on it, so to speak. But those people are few and far between. To get the kind of penetration that most entrepreneurs are hoping for, the kind of sales, the kind of traction they're hoping for, you're going to have to become a lot more literate on that second, much larger, much more intangible dimension, which is the perception, because it does play into each decision that a person's got to make. They come across your book on a bookshelf. They come across your brand of gin on a shelf in the grocery store or at a liquor store. They come across your heating and air conditioning equipment online, right? There's got to be a healthy degree of attention paid to the myriad of possibilities of their perceptions coming into it ahead of time.
The quote, perception is more real than reality, I think is in part because we see reality through our filter. And we have filters in various ways. One is through our eyes, quite literally. Certain people can see things that other people can't, right? Certain percentage of the population is colorblind, for instance. And that's sometimes important in ways that those of us who are not colorblind don't understand. So, for instance, you make a fancy web page, but you don't understand people who are colorblind, and you might end up putting things on there that they can't see. And it looks amazing to you, and it doesn't look like anything to somebody else. Now, that's a percentage of the population, but it's not a meaningless percentage of the population. Then once it gets into your past your eyes, there's all sorts of other processing that goes on around the domain of whatever it is that you are trying to sell, like electronics, for instance. If you thought all electronics were big because you came from a generation that computers were the size of a room, then it makes no sense that you could fit a computer in your pocket. Doesn't make any sense. You have to slowly move a person into that. If it's a product or service that is new to a person, you have to educate them on why that product or service might be effective for them, because one of their filters is screen out all of the confusion. Just get to something I can make a decision on.
Yeah.
And that happens very, very fast. I think it was it Steve yesterday who gave us some sort of statistic in his book, The Point, that I don't remember how many, 11 million bits of information a second or something like that is what he said.
Yes,
our brains are processing,
Steve.
right?
Yep.
And then when we focus on something, it's 60. Well, there's a massive part. There are a handful of things in your brain that are very specialized. So for instance, there's a whole section of your brain that looks for faces. That's why you can see faces in a tree, in a cloud, in the water. You can see faces where faces do not exist because there is an entirely separate part of your brain that is designed to just grab a face. That's super important when you're a social creature because it doesn't take us any time to find a face. We can make up faces where faces don't exist. That's how good we are at it. Now, you can imagine even in that, I see something with my eyes. There's clearly no face there. My brain goes, hey, there's a face. And now all of a sudden, poop, it grabs my attention away from something else. There's no face. My perception is there is. Reality says there's not. But that filtering mechanism that's designed to get me through my day interrupted everything, pulled my attention. And now I go, oh, wait a second. That's not a face. That's nobody.
I'm thinking of that movie Castaway with Tom Hanks.
Yeah. Right.
Where he paints his own, he cuts himself and he uses the blood to paint a face on that volleyball and he calls it Wilson because the brand is Wilson. And then he forms a relationship with it and he starts arguing with it and talking to it. And when it floats away on the water, he panics and goes swimming after it and brings it back. It says, oh, never again.
Yeah. Well, and our perception or reality, let's say reality is just raw facts and, truth, right? And some people would argue that there is no reality. I don't think we're going to go down that road. But let's say there is reality and it's somewhere, it exists between me and you. I'm going to perceive what I'm looking for in that reality.
Mm-hmm.
I probably won't perceive things, number one, I don't understand, and And because if I don't understand it, I'm not looking for it. And therefore my mind's not pulling it out, because our brains are a big classification categorization engine. That's what they do all day. Classify, categorize to be able to make it through the day. You're going to pull out your perception. You're going to pull out something that you can see. This is important, I think, when we get into content. If a person is writing a book, you have the opportunity to explain and set up a foundation so that a person can see a new reality.
Mm-hmm.
You can help, you can assist them in changing their perception by giving them new ways of looking at something, which then changes their brain to be able to see the thing that you're asking them to see, that they at 10 minutes, an hour, 10 hours before did not see. It did not occur to them. That is why I think perception is more real than reality, because we see everything through not only a physical filter, a mental filter, an emotional filter, that until that filter is enlightened with new information, new ways of processing, it will not be able to see anything different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why there's so many scenes, perhaps in movies, and adages through the ages of philosophy from various people who have said what you were looking for was always there. You just weren't ready to see it. And I heard that for years, and I thought, well, it must have been because I was just, had some serious character flaw. No, it's not always that. Sometimes it's just that you haven't learned to seek that information, and therefore what you're not looking for isn't going to find you.
We accept this very readily, this principle of that some people don't see things. We accept it very readily in technical fields.
Yeah.
Why do we not accept it very readily in emotional fields, mental fields, and allow ourselves the opportunity to go seek out new understandings? That's number one, so that we can see it, but also to really go a step further than if we're talking about sales, go a step further and figure out what is my consumer, my target consumer, my target customer, client, whatever you call them.
Mm-hmm.
What do they know? What do they see? How do I need to show up to be able to communicate to them? And here's why I say we readily accept it in technical fields. So I'm a programmer, and let's say you're going through a piece of software, right? And you just open up, click, and get a list of files that you could open into. And you open like File Explorer, right? You get a list of files that you could open up into your piece of software, right? That's something we've all done.
Yeah.
Right? Go through Word or whatever, click, open a file, it shows up. Now, I was working with a programmer who he wasn't used to working over networks in the way that we needed this system to work. And when he was writing his piece of software, which was running on the networks that we had set up for him, he did not understand that you can't just dump like all of the files. You would never want to dump all of the files into a folder, one big old folder, end up with hundreds of thousands. I mean, this company's documents were going in there every day, right? Thousands of documents. So you're going to end up with hundreds of thousands of documents in this folder. Now, from your drive on your computer to look at them, that's even going to be slow. Run it over a network. And the way he was asking it to do it was like, just give me a new file, give me another file, give me another file, give me another file, give me another file until I run out of files, right? It was going to take, I think I calculated it just on the network latency, how long it takes to get the traffic over that wire from that back room to this room over here, right? It was going to take, based on the number of files that they were going to develop over the course of a year, it was going to take probably 4 minutes, 5 minutes to simply get the list of files back to a user. He had no idea that this was going to happen. He'd never done it before. And so he thought that his way of how to access files was going to work just fine. And I said, this is going to completely crash and burn. And here's the calculation. Here's how long it's going to take. And based on how fast you save files, here's how long it's going to take till you reach the that egregious delay for all of your users. This system will come to a crashing halt. Only now it's going to be in production, and you're not just going to be able to like, hey, everybody, hold on a minute. Let's keep everybody on the phones while we work through this system. You're going to have to fix this.
Yeah.
In production, when the wheels of the proverbial wheels have already come off the bus.
Yeah.
And you've got people on path. You've got passengers on board. And you're trying to get in the middle of the night. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be a disaster. But this programmer had no idea. It never crossed his mind that he was going to run into that problem because he's just never done it. He's never been there. He's never experienced that issue. And he didn't have a whole lot of experience. As soon as I unpacked exactly what was going to happen with him and gave him a handful of calculations, he was like, oh, so then what do I do? Now, my perception on the system immediately when I heard how he was doing it, I was like, this isn't going to work. With no explanation, I was like, this isn't going to work. You can't do it that way. From his side of things, he had already written it.
Yeah.
So our understanding to this point that there's, I think, a book out there, What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Yeah. Our
understanding to this point needs to always be challenged because there's a whole universe of things that we're not seeing. We didn't know. And unless we press into that, we will not be able to change we will not be able to see new things. We will not be able to grow past this point until we're open to changing our perception, because there might be a whole new reality that's available to us simply at that kind of critical point of opening our minds and allowing new information in, which then, flip it back on our client or consumer or customer, knowing what to say in that moment that sparks them to open up, their perception to experience something new. That takes a little bit of thought, and it takes a little bit of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, for lack of a better way to say it, so that you can know what that point is and what they need to hear. Which, if you're writing about some path that you've been through, think back to yourself at that moment. What was that critical thing that I needed to know? What was the back to the benefits, right? What was the thing that this was how I was hoping this was going to, whatever it was, like, this is how I needed to change. Because we all know that point, like where our perception opened up. It's like, oh, we walk through if you've ever been caving, right? You walk through this small point and you're like, it's barely squeezing through. You're like, I should turn back. And you keep on going. All of a sudden, boom, it opens up into a big, vast expanse. That's the opening of new perception to see, to see further. What is that? What is the benefit that a person needed? What did we need at that point? That's the benefit that needs to be communicated to the potential customer.
So, I know everybody came here hoping for a magic button. And I'm pleased to say we're not going to give you one. But if you were going to tell people some reliable principles, I don't know, tactics, something practical, some questions they should be asking, or some things that they should be doing before they go to market to ensure that they've had some degree of, acquaintance with, collision with, whatever you want to say, how people perceive the benefit of what they're offering, what would you tell them?
I think it's really important to do market research. Do more research than you think you need to, because your view of the world is just that, your view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting and valuable to a point. But when you're selling to somebody else, you have got to see their view of the world as best you possibly can so that you know how to meaningfully intercept their day so that they will make a decision to investigate further. It's really all it is. But how do you meaningfully intercept somebody's day? Now, this is probably something that some people don't think about very often. But it's so important because there's something that you don't see that if you just simply ask the question, you could see. Now, there's a gas station not too far from my town. And they sent me I've got a little rewards card or a little rewards number with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of last year, they sent me a promotion and they said, you could get free butter for a year if you get a debit card through us that links to your regular bank account.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get our debit card, we'll give you a free pound of butter for a year, weekly. Free pound weekly. Did I say that? Free pound of butter every week for a year. There we go. Now, I cook, I bake all the time. And I saw $4. I was like, it's $4 for a pound. I saw $4 each week of free butter, whether I buy at a place I'm going to buy gas anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that hands down sucked me in. I was like, free butter? Absolutely, I will take free butter every week for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Every other gas station was like, hey, you could, if you buy these other snacks, you're going to get 5 cents off at the pump, 3 cents off at the pump. It's just like, I don't know how to calculate that, but I do know free butter.
Yeah.
Now, there's always something unexpected that your consumer will respond to that is not necessarily in the normal transaction that you think of. There's always something. And if you find it, your conversion rate all of a sudden spikes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think doing a bit of market research, understanding your customer, the more you do that, the more likely you are to find that one thing that spikes the needle that you can't repeat. Like they're not going to get me a second time on free butter for a year because I have the debit card already, right?
Yeah.
But they totally did suck me in and they got me. Think about this. What better way to build a habit than to keep people coming back every week? And now all of a sudden you got me in the habit of going to your store every week for a year. What do you think year number 2 or 3?
Well, you're going to need some bread
5.
with that butter.
Well, I'm going to make some bread so I can use all that butter for sure. But it builds a habit for a product that I'm going to use anyhow.
Yeah.
And $4, whatever your cost was on that butter, could have been the same amount of discount that you're going to give me on the gas anyhow. Only it's a valuable item in my life versus a calculation that I cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
Like 5 cents a gallon, how much does it save you? You have no idea, which is why it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand why people don't get this. Marketers don't get this. 5 cents a gallon. Ooh, so what? I don't know what that means. Free butter, 100% know what that means, and I will take it. There's the if you go a step further, you might find something that spikes the needle, and it's really because, and it really has nothing to do with the original transaction.
Yeah.
The one that you're wanting them to make. It's tangential to it. That's why I think, to answer, to put a period on your question, market research, go further than you think you should, or get somebody smart involved who knows these things and have them answer that question, because it will make a difference. And when you are competing in a global marketplace where there's one book here and there's 50 around it, or there's your product here and 50 around it, how are you going to stand out?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to communicate with that customer? It's going to be there's opportunity. There's opportunity to utilize this idea of perception and their worldview for your advantage. And ultimately, if you think you've got a product, service, or message that's going to change the world, it's to their advantage and the world's advantage as well. So why wouldn't you do it?
I was laughing thinking of this old George Carlin routine. Don't listen to it, by the way, if you were averse to the occasional profanity. But he has this one called Advertising Lullaby. And there's this funny part of it where he says, and if you act now, we'll include a combination keychain and garden hose. And I'm trying to picture that keychain and a garden hose. It's combined too. You got to drag them around again.
An expandable keychain.
It was funny. But having said that, yes, we have now solved the age-old problem, according to the U.S. government, of guns and butter. Just include a free pound of butter with whatever it is you're selling. And, that's the magic button we offer today here on the Think or Growth Workshop, where our answers make no sense. Yes. But in all seriousness, yes, the habit of researching and taking the time to ask in advance has saved a few good marketers a lot of problems that the rest of them seem to just run into over and over again without learning from them. And so with that in mind, you listening to this could probably benefit from having an ally on your side who specializes in doing that kind of research and that kind of thinking ahead, that chess strategist, thinking 4 to 5 steps ahead prior to making a move mentality. So prevalent here in the Think or Growth community, which if you go to thinkergrowth.com, you can learn all about. You can sign up, you can join, you can be part of our accelerator programs, business startup programs, taking you from zero to your first sale or from first sale to scale. My name is Paul Edwards. Jason Todd is the main host of this, but I took the liberty of doing the outro today to save him the trouble. See you next time on the workshop.